Hello, I'm Jeremy Fernandez. Well, a lot of things around the world are changing fast. Severe border restrictions and global share market freefalls are testing our politics, economies and society. Unprecedented government controls have been enacted as countries try desperately to contain COVID-19. Here in Australia, that's taken the form of official advice against mass gatherings of more than 500 people. That applies from Monday to non-essential events such as sporting matches and concerts, but does not include schools and public transport. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says Australia is lucky to have a relatively low infection rate, even though his Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, has caught the virus.
We simply say to the Australian people that we will manage this carefully in your interests. What we're announcing today is just another step. It's precautionary. It's getting ahead of this to ensure that we can minimise the impacts on your health and we can ensure with confidence the ability for people to be accessing the health services that they and their families will need.
So these policies are disrupting major events right across the world. The Australian Formula One Grand Prix is no longer happening. European Soccer League games have been cancelled and the NBA season has been suspended. The timing is unfortunate for them and terrible for local footy codes, which are just getting their seasons underway. In fact, round one of the NRL is all that will be played in front of a crowd at this point. Brett McKay joins us now from Bruce Stadium in Canberra. Brett, what's the mood there like at the Raiders-Titans clash?
Yeah, good evening, Jeremy. It's one of relief. Relief among fans as they arrive tonight that they'll actually be able to see the Raiders live and that they'll be able to see some football played from inside the stadium, because we don't know how long it will be before that will happen again. It is genuine relief amongst the fans that we spoke to tonight when they arrived. Here's a little bit of what they had to say.
To be here and to hopefully come away with a win and see some good football, mate, this is a win-win for us. As long as everyone can stay safe, obviously.
Could be around for a long time to come, so get in while we can.
Yeah.
So, Brett, what happens now with the rest of the games this season?
The rest of the games this weekend will proceed with crowds as planned. Next weekend's round two, however, is a different story. The NRL announced this evening that all games for round two will be played behind closed doors. Beyond that, round three and beyond is going to be a case-by-case basis, and the NRL will be guided by health and government authorities on that one.
Brett McKay in Canberra, thank you. The severity of the outbreak was rammed home by the World Health Organization this week. It did what many had been expecting for a while, labelling this outbreak a pandemic.
Pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It's a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear. We have rang the alarm bell loud and clear. We cannot say this loudly enough, or clearly enough, or often enough. All countries can still change the course of this pandemic.
Well, that announcement by the WHO has triggered a cascading series of global events which have changed the way millions of people go about their daily lives. With thousands of people isolated in their homes, travel bans have been enacted on large parts of the globe. The US announced an unprecedented halt on arrivals from most European countries.
This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. I am confident that by counting and continuing to take these tough measures, we will significantly reduce the threat to our citizens, and we will ultimately and expeditiously defeat this virus.
That news rocked financial markets, with Wall Street suffering its worst trading day in more than 30 years. The Dow Jones lost 10%, the biggest fall since the 1987 Black Monday crash. European shares suffered their biggest drop ever, and Australian and Asian shares also took a massive hit, but they have recovered some ground. The Australian government is trying to stave off a coronavirus-fuelled recession through $18 billion in tax concessions, one-off payments and other measures. The massive stimulus package is the biggest since the global financial crisis and kills off any chance the government will deliver a budget surplus. Political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
At $17.6 billion, it's much bigger than Labor's first stimulus package during the global financial crisis. Pensioners, welfare recipients and concession card holders will receive one-off cash payments. Almost 700,000 small and medium-sized businesses will receive up to $25,000. Tax incentives for business to invest. Half of apprentice wages will be picked up by taxpayers, and $1 billion will go to regional areas disproportionately affected by the coronavirus.
First a city, then a country, then the world. With reports of deaths on most continents and no vaccine in sight, the questions remain. How far will the virus spread? How many lives will it take?
The picture globally is getting worse. There's been close to 5,000 deaths and more than 134,000 cases. And it is important to note that more than 70,000 of those people have already recovered. In Australia, there have been more than 190 positive tests. 3 elderly people have died. Well, as you've seen, there's a lot of information and misinformation about coronavirus, and the advice on what to do is evolving daily. To cut through it all is GP Dr. Brad McKay and the ABC's national medical reporter Sophie Scott. I put some of your questions to them earlier. Let's go to our first question from Richard Eggleston. He asks, I have flu-like symptoms, but I haven't travelled or had any contact with confirmed cases. Should I self-isolate?
Now, this has been a big issue, hasn't it? Because there was some advice that if you did have those symptoms, that you should go and get tested, get the coronavirus test, and then self-isolate. But they've sort of pushed back from that, Brad, haven't they? Now they've really been quite specific. They were really overwhelmed. Doctors were overwhelmed with the worried well coming getting tested. So just having the symptoms alone wouldn't really be enough, would it?
Yeah,
Brad?
so the criteria at the moment, our guidance for doctors is that you need to have been travelling overseas in the last 14 days and also have symptoms as well. People are being advised if they've come back from overseas, then they should self-isolate if they can for 14 days from any destination. But if you haven't been in contact with anybody who's been diagnosed with coronavirus, then yeah, we're not being advised to swab people for that.
Is that a difficulty in the way it's set up? Because, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know. Say if you're walking on a street or you hit the crosswalk button or you hand over some money, can you get coronavirus without knowing that you've come into contact with someone who has been overseas, who has the virus and may not know it?
Well, this is the weird thing about the criteria, is that we're presuming that we're only getting cases that are being brought in externally from overseas. But we know that coronavirus is pretty easily transmitted from human to human. So you could definitely not have gone overseas at all and be unwittingly aware that you've been in contact with the virus.
And we certainly know now, both in New South Wales and Victoria, there are cases of community transmission. So that's people getting it in the community. They haven't been overseas. So that's starting to build momentum. So you'll probably see the criteria change for testing, you know, almost from day to day. Like they've brought in now the rebates for telehealth, so you can get a consultation with a doctor over the telephone or over the internet, and that's only just recent. You'll probably see that, you know, there will be changes. So that, I think, the testing criteria will evolve as well.
Teresa Day writes in, and she makes a really, really good point here. I'm concerned, she says, as a 46-year-old woman with an autoimmune disorder and a heart condition, I think the media and health officials need to talk more about how this is not a disease that solely targets the elderly or those with diabetes. This is a lot bigger than that, isn't it?
Yeah, so look, I noticed just recently the Victor Chang organisation have put out a thing for patients with heart conditions saying very specifically you should wash your hands, stay away from crowds, make sure you minimise contact with people. So they're recognising that, you know, not only the elderly are at risk, but people with those chronic conditions, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, all put people at an increased risk of contracting, not only contracting the condition, but having side effects and symptoms.
Brad, anything to add to that? I mean, we sort of think about the burden this is going to place on the health system, and it's not just from coronavirus cases, but, you know, if you have a car accident, for instance, you may not be able to get the help that you need, and that's got nothing to do with coronavirus. as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, so what people may not realise is that hospitals everywhere around Australia are going into crisis mode. So outpatient clinics are being cancelled. So if there's anything that's non-urgent, that's just going out the window completely. And this is to make way for ICU beds, so people can get intensive care if they're needing it. It's also to clear emergency departments as much as possible. And we are sort of fearing for the worst, or at least preparing for the worst, and hoping that it isn't as bad as what we anticipate. But this will delay care. So if you don't have an urgent operation, then yeah, you'll be put probably on the waiting list, and that will blow out for as long as we're sort of waiting for, and we don't know how long that's going to be.
pH neutral soap, someone asks, is it effective?
Oh, look, I mean, I wouldn't have thought so. The advice is basically just to wash your hands, to keep your hands as clean as possible with soap, ideally bar soap. I've heard that bar soap is actually better than liquid soap, and hand sanitizer is good as well, but I haven't heard anything more that pH soap can make more
Brad,
difference.
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so any soap that you use is basically going to dislodge the virus and other bacteria that can be on your hands.
It's about washing away the fats and the oils on your hands.
It's a physical change that's going to be washing away the virus and putting it down the sink. So if you're using alcohol-based hand gels, then that's going to be helpful as well. But yeah, the best thing is still going to be soap and water.
If you're ordering takeaway, is it better to only get hot dishes and stay away from things like salads? Does temperature play a role here in the survivability of the virus?
I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, it's interesting. I noticed that some of the companies that deliver food have put out a thing saying if you don't want to come into contact with your, say, Uber Eats driver, just let us know and we'll tell you when we're at the front door and we'll drop it off. But that's not really to do with what's inside. That's just to minimise contact with people. But no, I'm not aware of anything to do with the safety, food safety being an issue and whether it can survive in food and things like that.
So certainly temperature does play a role. We sort of find that the virus is more likely to degenerate and fall apart at higher temperatures. So if your meal is cooked, then yeah, like you're probably going to destroy the virus in that process. But then if somebody does have coronavirus and they have it on their hands and then touch your plate, then your plate isn't really going through a furnace. So it could still transmit from hard surface to person.
And how long does that surface, say a plate or a bench top or a crosswalk button, whatever, how long does the virus stay alive on that surface?
Depending on the weather. Some of the studies show that it could be even up to 9 days that it could be sitting on a surface. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's hopefully a few hours, but yeah, it depends on the heat, the temperature, the weather.
And this is something that we really need to address because this is such a new virus. There's a lot that we don't know about it.
Exactly. One of the most interesting things has been just how much science is being done about this virus and how quickly it's getting out to the public, which has been really good. Like often you'll see papers that take weeks and months to get into scientific journals. They're turning stuff around really quickly because the public needs to know this information. When we need to know, but the public needs to know. So, you know, even the advice about how long this virus lasts on surfaces, if you asked us last week, we might have given you one answer. But there's been other papers since then giving you a different answer. So, yeah, the information's evolving really rapidly.
Melissa Daisley asks, I think there's a question for you, Brad. I have symptoms, but I don't qualify for testing. What do I do?
So certainly now, if you have any questions, you can certainly get in contact with your GP. We have some Medicare codes that are available now, so you can have a phone call with your general practitioner and they'll be able to be paid to see you, which is a lot better for us rather than us working for free, so that's good. So that's sort of like the simplest thing to do. If you don't have, I suppose the criteria at this point of time is that if you've got symptoms of having a common cold, but you haven't been travelling overseas, you haven't been in contact with anybody who's been overseas, and if you haven't been in contact with somebody who has been diagnosed with coronavirus, sorry, that was a very long sentence, then yeah, you're not fulfilling that criteria. But if you've got any worries, of course, see a health professional and we'll hopefully be able to help you out.
And then in the criteria, there is the discretion, as far as I'm aware, that if the doctor is worried and you don't meet the criteria but they're concerned, that you can have the test, but they don't want to be testing people who don't need it because that will just overwhelm the system.
Now, if you want to hear more answers from Dr. Brad Mackay and Sophie Scott, you can check out our full 40-minute chat on the ABC News YouTube channel, and you can, of course, stay up to date with the latest information on the special coverage page on the ABC News website. That's at abc.net.au/coronavirus. Thanks for joining us. Keep your questions coming and we'll do our best to get to them in the coming weeks on our Facebook and YouTube live streams every Friday afternoon and on the ABC podcast Coronacast. From all of us for now, stay safe. Good night.